welcome to Meetup Address. It's a monthly program, and we are very delighted to be sponsored by the New Zealand Embassy, to be hosted by them here. We're also excited to have a fantastic speaker, which I will come to later on. But first, would you please give a round of applause to the New Zealand Embassy for hosting us. Thank you. They've been really hospitable to us, and I would like to just quickly introduce the ambassador to give opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Kapai. Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi o te ahiahi, no mai haere mai. Ko Michael Upton, tōku egnoa. Good afternoon and welcome. I hope it's warm enough for you. It's wonderful to see you all here. And firstly, my apologies. My Amharic is not good enough to speak in, but welcome. We're really pleased to be hosting Social Enterprise Ethiopia. I acknowledge the President, the CE, and other members of the board and the staff and all the organisers that have done the work today to get this ready. They've done all the work. All we've done is open the door to let you in. So well done to you. Can we give them a round of applause, please? I know you have this meetup regularly. We're pleased to be able to support that and encourage it. You know, social entrepreneurship, I know a lot of people shake their head and go, well, what does that really mean? So it's not the government, it's not the private sector, and it's not the community sector, but you're involved in a sweet spot in the middle and a really important space. And I think some people say it's going back to the past, but I think it's back to the future, yeah, about how you can really contribute. And you're not just thinking about profit for yourself or for all those that are interested, but profit and well-being for your community and those around you, the social and the environmental aspects as well. So, you're driving the innovation. So I really applaud you all. And today I think we're particularly fortunate, I don't want to steal your thunder, but to have a friend from Aotearoa, New Zealand, who actually is connected back here as well. So I won't say anything more, but I think there is a really strong link between Ethiopia and New Zealand, even though we're far apart. There's much that we do share culturally, our interests, but I think particularly the work that social entrepreneurs do, that's really important for New Zealand. We're a trading country. And I know there's a lot of innovation here in Ethiopia as well. So really looking forward to hearing what those connections are today. Welcome again. I hope you have an enjoyable afternoon, and it's great to see you all here. Thank you very much.
Would say a few things about Social Enterprise and Social Enterprise Ethiopia Association.
I would like just to say thank you very much for the New Zealand Embassy and Your Excellency the Ambassador to let us just to get into this very beautiful place. We are very happy. Everything is well done. Thank you, Adeno, and your team. This is marvelous. We are always inspired by whatever we are doing, including your Amharic. So the entire concept of having this type of meetup every Monday just to say to each other that we are not alone. As you clearly understand, I sold my house to buy an ambulance, and at that time people were against me. Now we are saving lives. So if you think something weird like this, still you can do it. So the reason why we are always having this type of meetup is to tell you that you are not alone. So today we invite Yoseph, one of our exemplary entrepreneur. I'm very much inspired. I heard about you through Brikti and Melat. So I hope the idea of making yourself a global citizen is an inspiration for everybody. I'm not no more in my kabale. I'm thinking humanity, so that I want to listen to you. Thank you very much.
I'd like to introduce Yoseph Ayele. Yoseph, I heard about when I was project manager for Social Enterprise World 4, and we wanted to try and get him on to speak there. Somehow it didn't pan out. So I'm really, really delighted and honored to have Yoseph here. He has a wonderful journey. The very beginning may be similar to mine in terms of growing up outside, but much more dynamic, his achievements at a young age. And so please give a round of applause and welcome Yoseph Ayele.
Thank you. Thank you. እንኳን ደህና አረፈዳችሁ. So my name is Yoseph. I was born here in Addis, and I live in New Zealand right now. Some of the introduction that Ambassador Michael shared is it's called Mihi Mihi. It's from Te Reo Maori. It's a way of introducing yourself. And I'd like to share my introduction with you, and I'll tell you why that's important to me. So, ko ntoto te maunga, ko tana te roto, ko kabana te awa, ko mana ki tanga te waka, ko amara ko hawasha na iwi. Engari ke te noho ke te rio o Mangaroa, ke te takitake o Mutaka, ko Yoseph Ayele aho. Tēnā koto, tēnā tātou tātoa. ምንድን ያልኩት ዮሴፍ ነው የሚባለው። ዮሴፍነቱ መጨረሻ ላይ ነው የምናገረው። መጀመሪያ ምንድን ነው እንጦጦ ነው የተወለድኩት። እንጦጦ ነው ተራዬ። ምንድን ነው ተራራዬ። ቀበና ነው ወንዜ። ጣና ነው ሌክ ሀይቄ። ቤተሰብ እንግዲህ አማረንን ነው የሚሉት። እኔ ብሔር ነገር አላውቅም። አዲስ አበባ ነው የተወለድኩት እና ማናኪታንጋ ማለት እንግድና ነው። እንግድና ነው የኛ ካልቸር፣ ህዝብን መቀበል፣ ህዝብን ማብላት። እኔ ቤት ብዙ የሀገር ቤት ምግብ እሰራለሁ። ሰው ሁሉ ከውጭ ወደ ቤት ሲመጡ እንግዲህ እንጀራና ሽሮ ምናምን ነው ማቀምሳቸው እና እሱ ነው ኢንትሮዳክሽን እና መጨረሻ ላይ ዮሴፍ ይባላለው ነው። እሱ የትራዲሽናል የማኦሪ የኢንዲጂነስ ኮሚኒቲ ኒውዚላንድ ያሉ እነሱን ኢንትሮዲውስ ሲያደርጉ እንደሱ ነው የሚናገሩት እና ቦታ ጋር ይያያዛል። So in traditional Maori culture, people introduce themselves by first sharing the mountain, the river, their lake, their tribe, their community, their family, and they put themselves at the end. And I share that because New Zealand has been a big part of my reconnection with my own identity, and I'll share with you a lot more later on. So as I shared earlier, I grew up in Addis, and I went to school at the Italian school when I was a kid. My mother wanted to send me to an international school because that was the best place to learn to think and critical thinking. It was really hard. I don't know how many of you grew up in the 80s and 90s here, but a lot of the education system was not that great. And so international schools were the places where parents who try to do well would send their kids to. So we were not rich. My mom borrowed money to send me to school. I took 3 taxis, an hour and a half every day to go there and come back. And we moved out of Ethiopia when I was 14. We lived in Tanzania and Kenya. I was that scholarship kid who got scholarship from one school to the other. And I was a product of the internet age. And I learned a lot of my English online. I learned a lot of things about the world online. I was curious about the world collecting stamps as a kid. I don't know how many of you collected stamps here. Great, okay, I don't feel too old. Growing up, I don't know how many of you experienced this, but pretty much everyone on the streets was either selling chewing gum, cigarettes, and diversity form, the DV form. I grew up in that age. ያደኩት ጊዜ ሰው ሊስትሮ መንገድ ላይ የሚሸጠው ሁሉ ማስቲካና ዲቪ ፎርምና ሲጋራ ነው። The story in the narrative was if you want to do anything great, you got to leave. ቆንጆ ትልቅ ነገር ማድረግ ከፈለጋችሁ ከሀገር መውጣት ነው። The best road was the road to the airport. የቦሌ መንገድ ነበረ. And the best building was the airport. So it's basically the whole narrative is how to leave. That was the narrative that I grew up in, and so I took that narrative and I embraced it because I had big ambitions. I wanted to do so many big things in the world. After traveling through East Africa, I was very curious. I was doing so many different things, and I wanted to learn how to think. I wanted to learn how to take knowledge but get it across many different disciplines. I I was really like one of those people who didn't fit in any category. I know traditional Ethiopian upbringing, people try to kind of get you on one line, either go become a doctor, or go become a lawyer, or go become an engineer. Those are the titles before everybody's names, engineer Ekele Adele. So that's really the traditional way, and I didn't fit in any of those categories. So I was attracted to the US, to liberal arts education. I applied to 16 universities in the US because I didn't know which one would take me in. And I didn't actually have a way to apply online as well because, still the case, but the internet experience that we all have is by consuming it, but we cannot actually participate in it, right? If you don't have a way to pay for things, more than half of the internet is closed to you. So I didn't even have a means to apply to college. So I had, someone who knows someone who knows someone who had a credit card from overseas. And that's what you use to actually pay the $70 to apply to college. I did that, and out of, I don't know how, but 9 universities accepted me. 5 of them gave me full rides, and one of them was Harvard. And I ended up, wanted to go there, which of course, they paid $200,000 for 4 years. But we couldn't, apply. We couldn't I couldn't afford a ticket, a flight ticket. So I was hustling, basically emailing whoever would give me free flights. And thankfully, Ethiopian Airlines gave me a free ticket to go. I said, guys, I'm the only Ethiopian going to Harvard this year. This is an important investment. And they said yes, and they gave me a free flight there. And I spent 4 years there. I studied so many different things. Again, I was not that person who kind of fit in any specific category. And I was just following my intuition, my desires, following the really interesting professors and teachers who I was really passionate to learn from. And so it was I cannot even tell you what my degree is because it's so broad that you don't even know how to categorize it. And some of my friends and I created our own study program, which didn't fit in the Harvard traditional category. And that was my experience there. And after I graduated, one of my friends who dropped out had started a technology company in Silicon Valley. And I really connected with him. He was my age, but he had dropped out and he was firing people since he was 19. And I'm like, I can learn something from this person who was applying things in the real world. So I moved to Silicon Valley to work in technology. I was there for just over a year. And something happened. One day I received a letter from the US government that basically said, hey, what you studied at Harvard and what your work is, they do not match in our database. So just to give you an example how the immigration system works, many of you probably know the American immigration system, but basically they take what your degree is, they have their own database of degrees, and then they find the closest one to it. I was a social science student who did everything and anything, so it was hard to match it to their database. And then they look at your job description. This is sort of cutting edge technology startup. Their database was from the 90s. So they find the closest thing on their database that matches that. And then they try to match their version of the degree from their database and your work from the closest thing on their database. And if they don't match, then you're not qualified to work there. So basically, I received that letter and they said, today's your last day of work. And I was very shocked because what drove me to the US was this theory that if you want to do big things in the world, go to the center of action. And that's what drove me to go to Harvard. That's the center of action. That's the center of gravity for knowledge and creation and history and the ivory towers that we know, right? And then I moved to Silicon Valley because that's where I thought was the center of gravity for innovation, for entrepreneurship, for technology. And there's a lot of that there too. But when I experienced that, it's like, wait a minute, maybe there's a different thesis, there's a different way of approaching this. Maybe the place to actually make the biggest impact in the world is not from the center of action, but it's actually from the edge, from the furthest point away from where that action is, because you can experiment, you can do things that you cannot do in bigger places. Gabachu እስካሁን? Yeah? Okay. And so I pulled out a world map and I started asking myself so many different questions. Where can I base myself? Where can I work? Some of my friends were looking at New Zealand and said, hey, have you thought about New Zealand? And when I was a kid, I was living in Addis and my dad was working in Nazareth, now Adama. And so I used to go there on weekends and I loved just sleeping under trees and having chicken running around and growing corn. Like, it was so nice just to be in nature. And so I had that memory and I've always wanted to be in nature. And so when I started looking at Google Maps of New Zealand, I got really taken away by the beauty and opportunity, but I started digging quite deep into really the context of New Zealand, the country, the position in the world. It's only 5 million people. It has all the infrastructures of the big countries, but it's much smaller and it's more agile, lowest corrupt index in the world. And there were so many things that were attractive to me. So, I said, well, let me just go and try it. So I moved to New Zealand on a one-way ticket. And one of the projects I'll tell you that I worked on in New Zealand, after landing there, we started doing events with my friends. And immediately, the government people started paying attention. And I actually do remember I went to an event and a guy from New Zealand Immigration came to me and he says, hi, where are you from? And I was so worried and scared because I have a lot of trauma and scars from immigration systems. And I said, I'm from Ethiopia. Like, no. I mean, like, what organization are you from? And we started talking and they were interested in saying, it's amazing that you came here. We want more talent here. We want more smart people here. We want more people who are creating entrepreneurial talent. And we started having conversations about that over coffee, because everything in New Zealand happens over coffee. And very quickly that led to meeting with the head of immigration. I was just 25-year-old Ethiopian guy who had moved to New Zealand. And after that, Nigel Bickle, who Michael knows, who was the head of immigration, he said, hey, I'm going to talk to the prime minister and senior ministers in a few weeks' time. What ideas can I take to them around like how we can innovate with our immigration systems? And I was so excited because I had so much experience from immigration. The example I told you was just one. I have many scar stories from immigration. And I said, well, that's really interesting. Give us some time and we'll come to you with an idea. And so basically in a very short period of time with friends and a number of other builders, we developed this concept called the Global Impact Visa, GIVES. And my co-founder Matthew came up with the name. We created a password-protected website instead of putting bullet points of, okay, let's research what are the countries in the world that are doing immigration creatively for entrepreneurs, and just started putting bullet points and research of the things that are working, that are not working, and basically create this narrative to say, hey, if as a country, New Zealand, you want to be relevant in a technological world, then you got to be very creative in how you attract talent. And when we went to meet with the governments, they were saying, oh yeah, this was before Facebook, got negative press. They wanted Mark Zuckerberg. But then when we showed them Mark's profile when he was younger, he would have never fit in any of the visa categories. Say, oh, Elon, again, before he became, they said, oh yeah, we want Elon Musk. How can we get more Elon Musk? Well, let's look at the version of him when he was starting his journey. He would have never fit in any of the categories. And we went down a long list of people that they wanted, and they said, wait a minute, when they were younger or when they were beginning their journey, these people would have never fit in any of your category. And the whole narrative is that, hey, today talent comes from anywhere, right? Talent comes from everywhere. Talent does not have nationality, it does not have age, it does not have color, it does not have gender. Talent is global, talent is borderless. And so as a country, if you want to be smart and actually build your economy on human capital, on innovation, on entrepreneurship, then you got to rethink the entire process and system, and even how you approach immigration around that. And most immigration systems are actually designed for the government. They're not designed for the customer. So wait a minute, how can we think about this whole process from the user's perspective, right? Like when you build a website, do you build a website for the website administrator, or do you build it for the person who actually comes to the website, buys things? You use it, you build it for the user, right? So like, how do we build a system for the user here, as opposed to for the government? And I was so surprised just how receptive and open, the government was at that time. So I guess very quick, fast forward into that story, that turned into what's called the Global Impact Visa. I basically went around all over government offices in Wellington, from the senior ministers all the way to the analysts. And I learned actually the people who do, who influence the most are the analysts, the people who actually do the work. You can have a bigger impact by going to the people who do the real work, not the people who read it and sign things. And within 1 year, that became policy. And then the government said, well, we can't do this ourselves. So we need to design this in a partnership model. And so we designed quite a unique public-private partnership where they said, hey, you guys go and target and find the best people for us, and then we will manage the risk, because we're actually really, that's our number one concern, is managing risk, managing national security risk, managing fraud, managing perception risk of New Zealand. And so we built it in quite a unique relationship of us doing the opportunity and them managing the risk. And that something like that had never happened in New Zealand before. One, such a thing. Two, at the pace that it's happened. So that whole program launched as what's called the Edmund Hillary Fellowship. It's build it as a community, because it's one thing bringing talent, it's another thing building community. And and that's something that I really appreciate what you guys are doing with the social enterprise community here, because ultimately entrepreneurship is a community thing. It's not something you just do on your own. You learn a lot from each other. And so so we launched it as the Edmund Hillary Fellowship in 2016 and said, hey world, if you want to change the world, New Zealand wants you. And in 4 years' time, we were given 400 visas. That turned into now 532 fellow community of people. Malat, can you share your hand? Malat is one of our fellows. We have Bruktit Gabu as well, who's going to be back in Addis next week. She's one of our fellows. We have 532 fellows from 48 countries. I've interviewed all of them. We take a very rigorous process and approach, and kind of, we know people know how to BS each other. We know how to navigate the whole journey of trying to convince you of something. We took all of that out and we just said, hey, I want to know a lot about you, what you're passionate about, what you're trying to build, what's your story, what have you done, thorough reference checks. And so we built immigration in a very different way. It's basically run as a startup. And the fellows that we have, it's very dynamic, very global ecosystem, from people who are at the beginning of the entrepreneur journey, to those who are mid-career, to those who have built multi-billion-dollar companies. I don't know if you guys have heard of WordPress. WordPress, so the founder of WordPress, Skype, founder of Skype, Asana, founder of Asana, AngelList, people who are influencing things at a global level have joined this community of people. And it's just been such an interesting testament to do things in a very experimental way to attract the best talent that you might not be able to do. And so as I was doing that, and when we completed the pilot with the government, during that whole experience, we got connected with the Maori, the indigenous community. And the indigenous community in New Zealand makes up about 17% of the population. And one thing that I learned through the experience of connecting with the indigenous community there is that there's a deeper interest in knowing who you are. Not what you do, not what house you have, or how much money you have, or the shoes you have. Who are you? And that's a very deep question to ask. We don't spend a lot of time asking, who am I? where is my gene? Like, where do I come from? What do I stand for? And the deeper I dug through that journey, it actually connected me more with my Ethiopian heritage. And it's not that I had lost it, but in this world, and I'll just be frank with you, being Ethiopian has been a liability than an asset. Traveling the world with an Ethiopian passport is the worst thing anyone can do, right? Like, I'm just being honest, like at every airport you get like, oh, hi, you've been selected for an extra check. Congratulations, you know? It's like, when you don't get selected, it's like something is going wrong today, right? So, and that's not just that. In every possible way, in many contexts, the system that we've lived in punishes you for the things you haven't chosen, right? And I'm not saying that that's a victimhood or whatever. It's just reality, right? And so I think connecting with the Maori way of seeing the world made me dig even more, like, who am I? Where do I come from? And really loving and embracing my own identity through that. And as I went through that whole journey and experience, I started spending a lot of time connecting with young students from Ethiopia, from Kenya, from other countries, on Telegram, on Twitter, and really just talking. And I've been coming here every year, and so I spent a lot of time with young people. And I started realizing the gated world that I grew up in is still the case, right? Even though now many people have cell phones and you have Telebir and you are browsing so many websites and all of that, you still can't download an app on Apple, right? Unless you have a global credit card, right? Like, you can't buy software. You can't, like, the world will not take your money because of where you're from. And that's absurd to me, right? And if you try to apply for work, Manaman, elsewhere, you know, you have 100 CVs, so they look at Ethiopian CV or something. It's very unlikely for them to do that. And so it just like hit me really hard that, wait a minute, we're still stuck in the old paradigm of how the world is, while we live in a, you know, in a world where talent is borderless, where really your potential is not determined by where you live and where you're from. So I just started going down that rabbit hole and really developing, because every time I've come back to Ethiopia and started giving talks or Manaman, I didn't feel I had something to offer, because, you know, out of 10 million Ethiopians, how many people can go to Harvard? It's a very small number, right? So people can listen and clap and feel good about themselves, but there's actually nothing tangible that can apply to the masses, right? So, but when I started going deeper into the technology world and how even some of what we've created is still gated for so many Africans. And on the other side, I started doing a deep amount of research in terms of the demographics, the makeup of the African continent. So do you know, right now there are 1.4 billion people in Africa. Well, that's huge, but we're gonna double in 20 years' time. So Africa is gonna be 2.8 billion people by 2050. Do you know how many Africans there will be by the end of this century? 4.5 billion people. And Africa is going to make up 40% of the whole world population by the end of this century. China is declining very, very, very fast. Europe and the West is declining very, very fast. India is growing, but it's also peaking quite a bit. The median age in Africa is 19. The median age in the US is 34. I don't know what's in New Zealand, but it's probably in the 30s, right? So the rest of the world, numbers are going down. In Africa, numbers are going up. And it's not just it's not just youth, it's also youth that is born in an internet era. What that means is you can actually access the whole world online. Now, you cannot participate in it today, but you can at least access it. And so when I started digging deeper into, oh wow, what has been the adoption rate of certain types of technology? You know, Ethiopia has been slow, I'll be honest, but if you look at our neighboring countries, it's been extremely fast. You go to a place like Kenya, you can do everything without money, paperless money, right? I can buy airline tickets with my M-Pesa account. Like I go to Kenya now, I don't even change dollars, I don't use my credit card. All I'm using is my M-Pesa card to do everything. Gatere mihun, katama mihun, like everything. And there's more than $500 billion transacted online through mobile money across all of Africa. And the number is increasing. There's about 60% internet penetration, mobile phone penetration, and about half of them use the internet. And so I've started seeing the growth of technology adoption, but on the other side, traditional software is closed off. So one of the technology areas I've been really curious about that I've been seeing is called Web3, blockchain. I know people in Ethiopia don't understand it, and I know there's a lot of stigma around it because people use it to rip off, and there's scammers and all of that. But the underlying technology of decentralization, I found it really, really interesting because now you're creating internet native money. At the moment, we're using the internet, but we're using nation-backed money that is bordered. What that means is you need the permission of that country to pay in that money, right? So you need the permission of Apple to pay to buy an Apple application from their website. We're living in a permissioned economy right now, but Web3 decentralization is creating a permissionless economy, and that got me really interested because now there's something to offer. Now it's not just fun stories to inspire you and go away. Now there's actually something tangible for people to hold on to and actually experience and own part of the internet, participate globally. So I've become very, very passionate and interested in not just borderlessness as it relates to identity, but borderlessness as it relates to your economic participation. So let me just give you one example. For every 3,100 Ethiopians who work online and earn $3,000 a month, which is very doable if you're participating in the knowledge space. I'm not talking about outsourcing or typing or whatever. I'm talking about actually using your brain instead of your finger muscles. For every 3,100 Ethiopians working online, earning $3,000, you increase Ethiopia's GDP by 0.1%. So just think about it in that structure. It takes every 3,100 Ethiopians to increase the GDP by 0.1%. To me, that is way faster than trying to sell flowers to Europe. I don't know, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just telling you, in a country where you have a ton of humans, that is more exciting than anything else. And especially if you build your reputation, if you build your track record of the things you have done. And I don't mean reputation based on Bahardar University gave you this degree and now someone has to confirm. No, I mean reputation based on the actions you have taken, on the track record you have built. Where I don't even need to know your name, I don't even need to know where you're from. All I need to know is your public address and the different things you have done behind it, right? And so I think these notions have got me really interested. Now, this technology space, the blockchain space, is still so early. It's still very messy. It's still full of scammers. There's still a lot to be built and to be developed. But to me, this is the best opportunity that Africans have had to actually change the paradigm and completely have a borderless, ungated economy where we can all participate and have sovereignty. You know, for a while I've lived and worked in nonprofits and NGOs and all of that. I know there's a lot of amazing work those organizations do, but my theory of change has changed quite a bit to the point where actually, like, economic sovereignty, self-determination is the most important thing in my view. Meaning, if I have money in my pocket, I know how to use it, and I can do something with it, then I think that's much better than someone trying to micromanage my life and different parts of my life, breaking it down in different pieces and trying to intervene in different ways. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I'm telling you that ultimately, more people have more economic sovereignty and self-determination, then you decide what you want to do with your life. You can go to chatbait and drink it our way, or you can build something great with your life. But ultimately, I think we're better off having that sovereignty back in our hands. And so that's the things that I'm focused on. And to me, that's where I think borderlessness goes from just thinking about us as behaviour or different countries or different identities to actually in a meaningful, tangible, economic way in areas where it actually matters. Anyways, I've said a lot. I'll stop here. And I just want to open up for questions, engagement, challenges. I hope I've triggered enough soft spots to get you thinking, and ideas have come up for you. So anyways, I'll leave it here. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. You are presenting like in a simple way, right? But since we are in Ethiopia, you are mentioning especially for related with credit card and other means, right? So now, if we need to engage in such activity, still it is a problem. So how do you plan to solve such kind of problem?
There are a number of challenges when it comes to new technology, and especially with a new area that's not understood, and with a new space that can threaten specific parts of central governance and all of that, right? So I guess the way I think about it is that, and I might be 100% wrong, right? So let's look at Ethiopia, and we can use Kenya, as two examples because they're neighboring countries. The biggest challenges, in my view, that those countries have is that, one, you have a fast-growing population, right? And so you got to find a way to create enough economic opportunity and economic activity for that population. That's a problem, because if you have a huge population that is unemployed, doesn't have food, is hungry, then that causes trouble. But on the other side, you have huge amount of human capital that if you harness it really well, it provides good value for you. So if I put myself, I'm not putting myself in any individual government leader's position, but as a generic government leader position, I'm thinking, okay, I have a lot of people to feed and support and create opportunities for, and there's huge goals that I have that require money for me to actually do that. So the way I think about it is, how can I basically increase our export, increase the things that we sell to the world, so we have dollars, which we're in short of, and we have money for me to actually spend things on. And so I would be prioritizing areas that allow for the young population of Ethiopia to be engaged in the digital global economy, because then you don't lose people. The traditional way of Ethiopia's development has been people like me, people like you, a bunch of people leaving and sending some money back home, $100, $200 a month to support family, and some part of it gets in the economy, right? But that's not an efficient way of doing it. I think a much more efficient way of doing it is you hold your talent in your own country, and then you get a good chunk of that as tax, which you use to pay for the things that you want. So to me, if just a generic government role would be, that's the area that makes the most sense out of a lot of different categories, right? Now, when you talk about digital money, when you talk about digital organizations, when you talk about decentralization, those areas can psychologically create barriers in your head, but it's kind of what are you losing and what are you gaining? And if what you're gaining is more than you're losing, then to me, there's that incentive for you to actually lean towards it. Now, some governments in Africa are leaning towards what's called CBDC. It stands for Central Bank Digital Currency, which is basically the central bank is creating a digital version of their local currency. Nigeria is doing it with the e-Naira, and that helps a lot, because now you can actually fight corruption in your country. You know where exactly a lot of money is going to, and you don't have to physically print money. Do you know how many African countries print their own money in their own countries? Very small. 44 out of 54 African countries don't print their own money in their own country. All their money is printed in Europe. And you know how much money they pay to print their money? They pay 6% of the total physical money supply as a fee. right? So basically, if you think about it that way, then I'm like, wait a minute, actually, I'm gaining a lot more by leapfrogging to this technology than trying to hold things and hold back. Now, I'm not talking about the political stuff and everything that happens around there. I'm talking about if somebody acts and thinks rationally, what do I have to gain versus what do I have to lose? I hope I have kind of answered your question. To your point, what are the actual products, right? So I think that will vary. So there's a lot of this technology that's been applied in the Western world where it's actually not solving real needs. But there's some areas where we're actually seeing certain types of applications. So one of it is actually putting data that you don't want anyone to go back and change because you cannot change it on decentralized database. So for example, there's a lot of interest in identity because I don't want to be able to go and change your identity, or you don't want to change your identity because you felt like it, right? Or your land title. You say, I own this piece of land, and you don't want your neighbor to come and say, tomorrow, traditionally, if it's just paper-based, then it's corruptible, right? But if you actually put it on a database that no one can go back and change, they can just add to it, that's one interesting area of application. Finance is another area of application. So I know many people now doing work online and getting paid with digital currency that they can convert to birr whenever they want, right? I was talking to someone the other day who basically is doing work, but he needed to set a PayPal account to receive payment from overseas, and you cannot set a PayPal account unless you have a foreign address. So you have to call your cousins, uncle, aunts somewhere in DC to see if they can use, their card. I mean, that's what we're living with right now, right? The other bit is access to foreign currency and reserve. There's a thing called stablecoin. So basically, there are companies that are basically storing dollars in a bank, and then they're creating the same version of digital dollars online. And people are transacting, saving, or whatever using those stable coins. It's much easier to access stable coins than physical dollars in most African countries because there's a shortage of that. So that's one of the areas of great application. The other area is debt, borrowing money. And I don't know what the experience is of lending here in Ethiopia, but I know a little bit in Kenya. So in Kenya, you can only borrow money from a bank if you're a banker or if you're a big corporate, right? If you're a normal person like us, there's no way the banks will lend you money. So there are other third-party players who are lending you money, but do you know how much they charge for interest? About 10 to 27% a month. Some of them charge you 1% a day. That's because you're a high-risk borrower. That's because they only know a certain part of you, right? But if you actually, with the blockchain, you basically are, you have a public address, and a lot of activities that you're doing are associated with that public address. And what you can do is you build your reputation, your profile around that. And the more things you do, then the more profile you have. So wait, can I use that to basically determine a credit score for you and lend you just, $10 today? And then I see how you pay back. And that keeps adding into your, and now once you have built that track record, you are incentivized to make sure it's positive because it can ruin a whole lot of other things for you, right? So there's some really interesting ways of doing that. In a very different category, there's an incredible artist called Kia, part of Yatreda. I don't know if any of you have heard of Yatreda. So go on Twitter and search for Yatreda sometime when you can. They're amazing photographers, videographers. What they have done is they have gone around and captured just beautiful Ethiopian art. And it's not just 2D art. They're doing 360-degree coverage of all the beautiful hairstyles of Ethiopia. So they've done 100 series of Ethiopian hairstyles. And they're saying, we're losing that because now everyone wants to be American, right? So let's capture the beauty of Ethiopia and put it on-chain so no one can actually go back and let the world enjoy and appreciate Ethiopian beauty. And so they've built an NFT collection there, and it's gone really amazing, and it's done really well, and it's really beautiful, and to me, it's one of the best projects that I've seen around. So you're seeing like small set of examples, but it's just the beginning, and some things are working, partly, and it's kind of like the beginning of the internet age in terms of where this space is at. And there are a lot of challenges and issues. I'm kind of just telling you the truth here. But if you're thinking in 10, 20 years' time, this is a space that can actually provide the infrastructure in which Africans can build our economy on, is part of where my belief is at. There are some projects and experiments happening here, but there are also Ethiopian companies and projects that are building on the blockchain. There are, I know, for example, so I'll tell you something that's quite interesting for Africa that's actually relevant is central banks, when you're sending money to Kenya or Ghana or Nigeria or South Africa, you're sending Ethiopian birr to Naira by first converting it to a dollar, and then they buy dollar, you buy dollar, and then they sell the dollar, blah, blah, right? And now all of that is running through the global banking system. SWIFT, when you send money. Do you know how much Africans pay for SWIFT? About $5 to $10 billion a year, just on SWIFT fees alone, right? So, that's a huge expense line. So what central banks are doing slowly, quietly, is saying, can we create our own internal settlement layer? Can we settle transactions amongst each other without having to go through the euro or the dollar? They need to really flesh out how it works, but they're looking at blockchain-based infrastructure to do that, because they're not going to hire Oracle and pay them billions of dollars to build it for them, right? It's just not the context, right? But you can build some of that infrastructure on the blockchain in an easier way. I know South Africa and Kenya, and I know Rwanda, a bunch of countries are creating sandboxes. A sandbox is basically saying, we'll let you either do these experiments in this region or in these areas. We'll give you the regulatory clarity to do whatever experiments you want to do. And if things work, we'll allow you to do it nationally. I don't know if the Ethiopian government is thinking like that yet, but that's interesting seeing in other countries. But the beauty is if some countries do it and they're 3 years ahead, other countries will look, that's interesting, we'll adopt it, right? So to me, it's a matter of when, it's not a matter of if, in terms of other countries catching up.
So what are you cooking for social entrepreneurs here? Because that's all matter here.
Good question. What am I cooking? Shut up. First, I don't know what you guys are building, but being an entrepreneur is an incredible experience, but it's also very challenging, right? And so find a problem that you're passionate about and go and solve it. And integrate, to me, digital is not always the answer, but I think it can accelerate a lot of things. So if you think, what does this look like from a digital lens in terms of what I do? Whether you're doing textiles, whether you're doing coffee, or whether you're doing events, whatever area it is that you're working on, try to integrate digital technologies as part of it, and see where and how that can help accelerate your process. And entrepreneurship to me is just all about execution. It's 1% talk, 99% execution. Sometimes here in Ethiopia we know how to talk well, and so it's just really focus on fast and great execution and build teams that align with you on that. I know that's a very generic thing to say, but if you have got very specifics, I'm happy to go down in those areas.
Thank you for this opportunity, and I thank the ambassador of New Zealand for this whole thing. And okay, my question is, what's your plan for Ethiopia? So, what are you planning? As my friend said, what are you planning on Ethiopia with the social enterprise here? So, there's some saying that tough times create strong men. Strong men create easy times. Easy times create weak men. So in the Western world, there are, I don't want to say this, but there are a lot of weak men. But here in Africa, there is a lot of strong men because it's tough here to live. So Africa got a lot of ideas, a lot of ideas. There's some saying that there is no underdeveloped country, but undermanaged country. So to be honest, in the near future, the whole world needs Africa.
By your story, personal story, through underdog story, and I must admit, quite impressive. I have a couple of questions for you. Where in terms of socio-economic influence, should we, once in this congregation or more, should expect your fellowship to expand its influence in the African socio-economic ecosystem? And my second question is, first I would like to mark in bold that their questions are important, that you should point out if there are any points of privilege you intend to design for Ethiopia in specific. So my second question is, how would you choose to put in words the kind of cooperation you are getting from the Ethiopian government? Because we both know, honestly, that you can't go any step ahead without the cooperation with policymakers of the Ethiopian political ecosystem. How would you choose to put in words that context? Thank you very much.
Gotcha. So I think there are three questions. The first question is, what am I doing about opportunities here in Ethiopia? And I like your notion of, strong men and women are created through tough times. And I believe that, and that's actually been my story. My dad told me this story when I was a kid, and you all might know as well. There are two mice fall in a jar of milk. One drowns and dies. The other one struggles so hard that it turns the milk into butter and walks out, right? And I've been a believer of the latter. Like, if you're given a challenge, turn that into an opportunity. Part of my story in New Zealand was turning my own challenges with immigration into a solution, right? So go really deep where it pains the most, and you'll find something really beautiful there. And so it's actually what I'm doing right now relates to that, which is I'm focused on backing leaders that are doing meaningful work on the continent. So specifically, on one side, I'm setting up a venture fund to invest in startups, technology startups, that are solving real fundamental challenges for the continent with technology. And part of my goal is to identify those founders, builders, and back them and support them with financing, global access, and infrastructure access to help them succeed. But it's not hand-holding, it is really finding people who are running and giving them the little bits that they need along the journey. So to me, I think what you're saying is, ultimately it's all about execution. Leadership is all about execution, and who executes really well with discipline and focus. And these things are easily said than done. I've talked to many people who have been involved in either construction projects or business projects that are half finished or didn't think about other critical things around the line. So there's a lot of desire and a lack of execution. And so in many ways, if you're surrounded by a pool of people who are kind of half executing, and if you're a great executor, then you stand out incredibly well. And that's one advantage of some of the issues that we have here in Africa is, if you know how to execute really well, you can attract a lot of support around it, whatever it is. So that's my contribution to it, because I don't know all the solutions, right? You've been breathing, living. I've been in New Zealand the last 10 years. So my role is to support the people who are doing the real work to really help the future of the continent. And if I come to your question, the first one was the connection between the fellowship and eco-social development in expect me personally, or? Oh, so that fellowship is specifically focused on New Zealand. So I don't know how much you can expect. Maybe ask Melat and Brukti to be bridges between that, because there's an incredible network there, and so you two can help leverage that. I'm trying to do my best as well, but you can build bridges towards that. But I think it's the question for you all as well is, I've given you a little bit of what I've learned. You can go online and find a lot more towards it. Is what aspects of that do you find most exciting for this ecosystem? And then go build it, go do it. You know, and like when I moved to New Zealand, it's not like the head of immigration waited for me at the airport to say, hey, let's work together. I had to go get it. Like I had to go knock on the doors and really make it happen. And so if there's something you truly believe in, you just hustle, make it happen. I mean, that's ultimately, that's what it takes. And you know, you talked about government. Honestly, I don't know much about how the Ethiopian government works and their relationship, but something I can tell you, in other countries in social enterprise, how many social entrepreneurs have seen themselves, especially in the social impact lens, is asking what are the big failure points. So business has been looking at the failure points of the public sector and trying to meet that need, but social entrepreneurs have been looking at what are the failure points in social services or things that government should normally do that are not happening. The social enterprise community takes it on and builds those institutions. And then if what you're building becomes great, then the government will take it and make it into a policy or will apply it at a national level, right? Now, that might not apply to Ethiopia or other countries, but that's one way different social entrepreneurs are thinking, right? So for example, you know, some people are working with training homeless people, giving them jobs and opportunity and all of that. Well, you might think, well, this would be something for a government to do, but you know, governments are not set up now to meet every need of every citizen, right? So people organize themselves and create that value proposition that, you know, they create that institution that then fills that gap. So I guess to you is kind of putting it up back to you is saying, what are the areas that you see biggest opportunity that either business or government are not doing that you individually or collectively can work towards and actually execute and build solutions for? I don't know if I've answered your question, but I think it's also, it's a hard question for me to answer, and so the best I can do is put it back at you.
May I please ask people to actually speak to Yoseph one-to-one, because we need to draw this program to a close. But first I want to thank Yoseph for picking really something that I think we're backwards. We were one step behind. Kibret always says about housing. Ethiopia is full of housing problems, and yet nobody has come with a housing, with a housing solution. So there's so many. Ethiopia is wealthy for a social entrepreneur because there's so many challenges and so many ways that we can resolve these problems. I just want to give a very, very quick example. I think because there was questions about how easy we can do it. And I went to another talk, and the speaker spoke about somebody at some university who devised an app to be able to order food, homegrown food, around at some university. So he went around to all the mothers and said, can you cook 2 or 3 dishes more? We'll pay you for it. And then he had this app where people could order food, and then he selected all the outer talents to go and collect it. So because they need money, so he paid them to go and collect. So he did this. I think it was a group of 4 actually, that they devised this app to be able to address their needs and everyone else around them. And it was very, very successful. I think they made 700,000 or something like that. But all those opportunities, you just have to open your eyes and look at how you can, whatever you're passionate about, how you can actually solve it.
Can I say something on that?
Sure.
You know, just one of the other lessons that I've been learning is So there's Sungyi over there, my wife. Sungyi, wife, yeah. She's from Korea, so I've been spending a lot of time in Korea. And I think there's something really fascinating about Africans looking at specific Asian countries and how they have pursued development in their own countries. And Asian style of execution is very different from Western style of execution. It's a lot faster, it's more efficient, it's more coordinated and organized. It depends what countries you're looking at. But at least countries like Korea, Japan, Southeast Asian countries, they've done really good. So definitely, look at that. And you talked about housing. Like we just built our house in New Zealand, and it was like a Lego pre-assembled house. And I find quite interesting even that model. So whenever you find big constraints, that's like interesting space for good experimentation, right? And good innovation. So, I see so many houses being built in a very slow way. Is there anyone who's thinking about fabricating houses in warehouses and actually assembling them on site? Our house was assembled in 12 hours. So there was nothing in the morning. By the end of the night, there was a whole house there. Right? You can do things like I'm not saying that's applicable exactly here, but I'm just giving you an example of think about it outside of the box, like different ways to get to that destination. Because if you have to build 100,000 homes every year in Addis Ababa, I don't know, I'm just pulling that number out. But I'm just giving you an example, right? You got to think about it in a slightly different way. And it's not always kind of just trying to optimize and become efficient, like there are companies like Ride and a bunch of others here that are basically doing what other countries have done in a certain way. When we think about innovation, it's easier to kind of copy that, but sometimes just think from first principles. What are the real challenges that we have here? And if this was solved, what would that look like? And start thinking from that approach. And just have zero boundaries in how you think about it at the beginning. And I don't know, that can give you very unique approaches to getting to that finish line. So Edmund Hillary Fellowship, so that fellowship is closed at the moment. We're waiting for the New Zealand government to decide what it wants to do with it. So we'll let you know once they make that decision and open it up. I think there's some really interesting ways of bridging Ethiopia and different parts of Africa with New Zealand in that way. So the website is ehf.org, ehf.org, so check it out there. And I'm sure once it opens up, now that the embassy knows about it, you might hear more about it. But we're basically waiting for the government to get its act together and decide.
Yes,
Thank you.
He's an Ethiopian who's made a change in another borderless country. So, again, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.